In the humid heat of Laos, villagers whispered about a plane that arrived without a schedule, carried no airline markings, and flew even when the war supposedly didn't. It landed softly, like a ghost. No tickets, no passengers, at least none who spoke. Locals called it the silver bird that brings storms. This wasn't a rumor. It was Air America, the CIA's covert airline born in Cold War shadows where diplomacy failed and deniable operations thrived. Its pilots were ex-WW2 daredevils, mercenaries, and men who signed contracts they could never talk about. Their mission? Deliver cargo into forbidden jungles and extract people the world must never know existed. Guns, heroin, agents, refugees, everything blurred into secrecy. And every landing came with one rule. What you see in this plane never happened. Air America began as civil air transport, a bankrupt airline purchased quietly through cutout companies. On paper, it delivered humanitarian aid. In reality, it slipped CIA operatives behind enemy lines long before the Vietnam War had a name. Its pilots flew without military insignia, so Washington could deny responsibility. Its aircraft logs were hand-edited, coordinates vanished. Missions existed only as whispers in Langley corridors. These planes carried Hong fighters, secret police chiefs, informants, prisoners, and sometimes bodies no one wanted traced. Pilots joked, "We're not in the Air Force, we're in the air farce." But jokes hid a brutal truth. Air America kept entire proxy armies alive. And their most dangerous cargo wasn't guns. It was information so explosive that even presidents weren't fully briefed. In 1965, pilot Jack McGovern received a sealed crate marked simply agricultural supplies. But the box was too light for fertilizer and too carefully guarded for tools. His escort, a man in sunglasses who never blinked, said only, "Fly low, ask nothing." Mid-flight, turbulence cracked the crate. Inside were chemically purified heroin bricks, white, stamped, military grade. Jack realized the rumors were true. The CIA wasn't just fighting communism, they were funding proxy armies through narcotics. The Hmong guerrillas demanded payment, and drug routes paid fast. Some pilots quit, others stayed silent. Jack landed the plane, handed over the cargo, and watched teenagers carrying M16s load the drugs onto mules. Air America's dual identity was no longer a secret. It was a machine, one wing carrying democracy, the other carrying poison. Officially, Air America transported refugees, diplomats, and missionaries. Unofficially, it carried men with erased identities, CIA case officers, defectors, assassins, and scientists pulled out of collapsing regimes. One pilot recalled evacuating a man who wore a suit in the jungle, carried no luggage, and never spoke. Only later did he learn the passenger was a Chinese nuclear physicist who'd engineered a warhead for Beijing and was being flipped by the CIA. On another flight, a shackled prisoner begged the crew not to land, insisting the people waiting below weren't soldiers, they were executioners. No records of that flight exist today. Passengers boarded at dawn and disappeared by dusk. No manifests, no names, just whispered instructions. If this plane crashes, we were never on board. Air America flew where even the US military refused to go. Tiny dirt strips carved into mountainsides, hostile valleys where anti-aircraft guns waited like hungry mouths. These pilots performed STOL landings, short takeoffs and landings, dropping into spaces barely wider than a basketball court. A single miscalculation meant cartwheeling into the jungle canopy. Some missions were so suicidal, that pilots were paid hazard bonuses in cash before takeoff, just in case they didn't return. The jungle was littered with crashed Air America planes, their fuselages still holding crates labeled medical supplies that were anything but. Every landing, every extraction pushed the airline deeper into operations Congress never approved. And somewhere in Langley, a file grew thicker, detailing a scandal that could burn Washington to the ground. Air America's planes drifted over one of the world's deadliest economies, the Golden Triangle, where Laos, Burma, and Thailand fed a narcotics empire worth billions. Entire villages survived on poppy. Warlords ruled like microstates. When communist forces cut funding to Hmong allies, the CIA faced a brutal reality. They needed money fast. The Hmong produced opium. Air America had planes. It was a match sealed not with signatures, but with silence. Pilots claimed they only carried food and medical supplies, but everyone knew the bulging burlap sacks weren't filled with rice. Every flight pumped more heroin into the international black market, feeding addiction waves in Saigon, Hong Kong, and ultimately the US. This wasn't just a war. It was an economic machine built on powder, and Air America was the conveyor belt. In 1971, a junior State Department analyst uncovers something chilling: coded flight logs showing CIA-authorized drug shipments disguised as relief missions. He traces one route from Laos to Okinawa, then straight into US military bases. Heroin was reaching American soldiers. Addiction soared. Entire battalions were compromised. He brings the evidence to his supervisor. By morning, he's reassigned. By evening, his clearance is revoked. Weeks later, he vanishes from Bangkok. His report is sealed under national security, then buried. But a single page escapes. A photocopy passed quietly to an investigative journalist. This leak would eventually ignite Senate hearings, destroy careers, and expose a truth Washington feared most. The CIA's own covert airline may have become one of history's largest drug traffickers. And this was only the beginning. On a humid March morning, a C-123 provider lifted off from Long Tieng, the CIA's secret city, carrying 3 spies, 2 crates of supplies, and 1 pilot who sensed something wrong. The radio operator heard only static, no chatter. 20 minutes later, the plane disappeared from radar. CIA ground teams found nothing. No wreckage, no smoke, no beacon. Locals whispered about soldiers looting a crash site in the mountains. A Hmong tracker claimed the cargo was seized by a rival militia. Inside Langley, panic spread. One of the missing operatives allegedly carried documents revealing covert financial deals between Air America and warlords controlling heroin labs. Washington labeled it an accident, but the families of the crew would later receive anonymous letters saying, "The plane didn't crash, it was taken," and the documents on board could rewrite the entire history of America's longest secret war. In the mid-1970s, after the war collapsed and Air America dissolved, former pilots started talking. Not publicly, never on record, but among themselves, in dimly lit bars and veterans halls. They spoke of missions where they were ordered to fly blind, of packages guarded by CIA officers carrying diplomatic pouches that weighed far more than documents. One pilot claimed he ferried a half-ton of raw opium without knowing until the stench filled the cabin. Another insisted he evacuated a political prisoner whose identity was blacked out on every form. They weren't criminals, they said. They were soldiers obeying impossible orders. Many felt betrayed, discarded by the very agency they risked their lives for. They wanted their story told, not the Hollywood version, the real one. An airline that fought a war America never admitted and paid a price no one wants to remember. Deep inside a CIA safe house in Vientiane, 3 men met in total darkness: a U.S. intelligence officer, a Hmong warlord, and a Thai narcotics broker. The agreement was simple. The CIA would supply transport and protection. The warlords would keep the jungles hostile to communists. In return, they controlled the opium routes. This agreement, unsigned, unrecorded, became the engine that powered the secret war. Leaked memos showed that without narcotics money, America's proxy army would have collapsed within months. Even worse, documents hint that senior officials knew about heroin shipments but allowed them, fearing the communists would win if they interfered. This wasn't conspiracy theory, it was Cold War math. And historians now believe this single deal may have prolonged the Vietnam conflict by years, costing thousands more lives in the shadows. Air America wasn't just flying a war, it was feeding it. Deep in the Laotian highlands, where fog clings to the trees like ghosts, Air America pilots reported glimpses of something unusual. Makeshift compounds guarded by child soldiers, smoke rising from crude chimneys, and metal drums stacked like fuel depots. These weren't villages. They were drug labs, primitive yet powerful, converting poppy resin into number 4 heroin. Chemists trained in Hong Kong flew in under forged identities. Local tribes harvested the poppies. Warlords enforced silence. Several pilots later admitted they saw these labs from the air and reported them. Their files show no follow-up, not a single investigation. Why? Because destroying those labs would mean cutting off the Hmong resistance, America's proxy fighters, at the knees. The CIA needed the Hmong. The Hmong needed opium. The labs stayed. And each drum that rolled out of the jungle fed a network stretching from Saigon to New York. In 1972, a Porter aircraft went down during a storm near Pak U Cave. Locals, scavenging the wreck, expected weapons or rice. Instead, they found tightly sealed bricks of pure heroin. Dozens of them, each stamped with a coded triangle mark linked to a powerful Laotian general on the CIA payroll. Within hours, CIA officers sealed the site, ordering villagers never to speak. For decades, most didn't. But one teenage witness took a brick, hid it for years, and eventually handed it to a French journalist. Lab tests confirmed it. The heroin was military grade, meaning high purity, advanced processing, and distribution markings used only by major syndicates. For the first time, physical evidence tied a US-backed general directly to the drug trade, using an Air America flight path. It wasn't proof the CIA trafficked drugs, but it proved they protected those who did. Politically, the difference was everything. Morally, it meant nothing. One of Air America's strangest legends involved ghost manifests, passengers whose names never made the logs, whose faces pilots swore they saw, and who vanished the moment wheels touched the runway. Former crewmen recalled picking up men in civilian clothes who spoke perfect English but carried no IDs. Some wore military boots polished to a mirror shine. They boarded silently, avoided eye contact, and carried metal cases stamped with US embassy seals. One pilot remembered landing in Thailand and watching 2 of these men escorted away by Thai intelligence, only to be told later the aircraft recorded 0 passengers. Who were they? Defectors? Assassins? Operatives conducting cross-border missions the US government could never acknowledge? Nobody knows. But the term ghost passengers appears in multiple testimonies from the Church Committee hearings. Even the CIA couldn't explain them. Or wouldn't? In 1974, an Air America mechanic named Paul Morris discovered something odd. Hidden compartments welded inside a C-46, too small for people, too precise for fuel, but perfect for storing contraband. He photographed them and confronted a senior officer. 3 days later, Morris died in a motorbike crash on a dry road with no traffic. Locals claimed they saw a black Jeep following him. His toolbox disappeared, so did his camera. Years later, a former CIA contractor confirmed that modified planes did exist for sensitive materials, he said, not drugs. But he refused to say what those materials were. Morris left behind only one surviving photograph smuggled to his brother, a dark, metallic compartment with fresh weld marks. Experts later called it highly suspicious. To this day, no official inquiry has ever mentioned Paul Morris. Some stories in war don't end with truth, they end with silence. By the late 70s, the rumors had grown too big to ignore. Journalists, ex-pilots, even foreign officials accused the CIA of knowingly enabling drug networks across Southeast Asia. Langley responded with its strongest weapon: bureaucracy. Floods of declassified memos, fact sheets, and statements insisted Air America carried only humanitarian supplies. Press briefings mocked critics as conspiracy theorists, but the denials had cracks. When asked whether CIA-backed generals were involved in the heroin trade, officials avoided every yes-no question. When asked about the vanished analyst from 1971, they cited ongoing classification. Their strategy was clear: deny what can be disproved, doubt what can't be confirmed, and drown everything else in paperwork. Yet, behind the polished words, insiders admitted the truth quietly. The agency didn't deal drugs, one former officer said, but we armed men who did, which to many was the same thing. By the mid-70s, the Golden Triangle had become the world's largest heroin zone, and Air America's flight routes cut straight through its heart. Rival factions, Hung militias, Chinese triads, Burmese warlords fought quietly for dominance. The CIA wasn't trying to control the drug trade. It was trying to control the people who controlled the drug trade. One former operative described it like this: heroin wasn't the prize, loyalty was. If a warlord helped rescue downed American pilots, he got weapons. If he sheltered communist defectors, he got aircraft repairs. If he fought the Pathet he got fuel and other freedoms. A photographer captured a supply drop gone wrong. Crates marked medical supplies bursting open to reveal military radios and rifles. In the background, villagers carried sacks of opium like sacks of rice. Two economies, war and drugs, operating side by side, both protected by the same invisible hand. In 1978, congressional investigator Laura Myers uncovered a restricted folder labeled AA-214, Special Cargo Permissions. Inside were flight logs noting uninspected uplifts authorized by a single signature, a CIA liaison stationed in Vientiane. The logs matched known drug-producing zones. When Myers pressed for access to related memos, the agency revoked her clearance overnight. 2 weeks later, she resigned. Years afterward, in a rare interview, she said one sentence that shook the room. "Every time I got close to the truth, the paperwork moved or vanished." The AA-214 file has never been found again, not in archives, not in FOIA requests, not even in CIA re-releases. It simply evaporated. Like so many pieces of the Air America puzzle, it wasn't disproved, it was disappeared. In 1975, the US pulled out of Southeast Asia. Air America officially dissolved. The planes were sold off or scrapped. But something strange happened. Aircraft with the same serial numbers appeared months later in covert ops in Central America. Pilots who swore they'd retired were spotted refueling at clandestine strips in Honduras. Even stranger, a C-123 aircraft, once tied to Laos, reappeared in 1986, flying guns to the Contras and returning with agricultural products. The same pattern, the same shadows, the same silence. Historians now believe Air America didn't die, it mutated. The networks, pilots, shell companies, and methods were recycled into the next covert war, and the next one after that. Air America wasn't an airline, it was a template, a blueprint for invisible logistics, a ghost that moves from conflict to conflict, long after its name disappeared from history. In 2002, an elderly Hmong commander granted a rare interview in a refugee camp in Thailand. His memory was fractured, but one detail was crystal clear. Air America saved us, he said, but they also saved the men who poisoned our children. He described generals arriving in American helicopters, promising weapons in exchange for taxes, their word for opium. He described pilots who looked the other way. And he described one American with a soft voice who warned him, "If anyone asks, say we brought only rice." The commander didn't know his name, but he remembered his final visit. The man stood at the doorway of a hut, sunlight behind him, and whispered, "One day, someone will tell this story." Moments like that live outside documents, outside denials, outside politics. They live only in memory, human, fragile, fading, and yet they ring truer than any official report ever written. History books call Air America a civilian airline. Veterans call it a lifeline. Critics call it a cover-up, but the truth lies somewhere darker. Air America was the birthplace of modern covert logistics, a machine built to move anything, anywhere, without leaving fingerprints. Guns, spies, refugees, and yes, drugs and men who profited from them. When the war ended, the world erased the airline, but its shadows remained in black budgets, in private military contractors, in silent airstrips from Latin America to the Middle East. The story doesn't end with a confession or a clean verdict. It ends with a question. If one airline could reshape a war, bankroll warlords, hide ghosts, and rewrite a region's history, what else has flown under our radar? And what invisible aircraft are still out there, unlogged, untraceable, rewriting the world while we sleep? If you found this story eye-opening, hit like, share it with someone who loves real investigations, and don't forget to subscribe, because Reality Decoded returns next week with another hidden chapter the world wasn't meant to see.